Solarpunk is usually defined as an emerging literary movement which arose as a reaction to the depression of cyberpunk on the one hand and the looming catastrophe of the climate and the Earth system on the other. It features storylines where the humanity has either won the fight for the climate or is heading there. These stories themselves are optimistic, yet not escapist. The solutions they present need to be somewhat realistic. So they are based on existing or possible technologies and not on some magical nanomachines. Son. And finally, this victory is achieved by cooperating with nature and not by conquering it in an eco-modernist fashion. This definition is fine, but there's no single great book that was published and boom, you've got a new genre, folks, free to build upon and remix. Well, true, there are 2 great novellas, several anthologies of varied quality, and some precursor novels, but we don't have, like, proper Solarpunk works. So we need a more honest look on what Solarpunk is. And, in the first place, it is a need of, and a conscious search for, this way of thinking spread across literature, art, and activism. Paradoxically, it's doing better in the latter two. To quote the Solarpunk manifesto,
"We are solarpunks because the only other options are denial or despair."
This despair manifests as doomerism and depression, both in politics and in everyday life, and denial is pretending that we will be saved by the free market or technology. In literature, despair would be cyberpunk and all the post-apocalyptic stuff, while denial would all these young adult-type stories where the plucky heroes solve our crises by defeating the bad guys using the power of friendship. Meanwhile, what the emerging political climate movements need are new inspirational stories and narratives. That's not easy, as our times are saturated by what the British philosopher Mark Fisher calls hauntology, when everything is overflowing by ghosts of the past, like retro vibes, or a lot of entertainment being just remakes and reboots of 80s and 90s stuff. This can also be blamed on neoliberalism, which has consumed the whole spectrum of politics in its system of the only way of rationally managing the world, by market optimization and not by some lofty and immaterial values or ideas. So the aim of Solarpunk would be to find a new, alternative language of realist hope for both millennials and Gen Z, who have lived in a world devoid of both hope and alternatives. Solarpunk fares better in art, with its inspirations taken from Latin America aesthetics, Afrofuturism, Studio Ghibli anime, Art Nouveau, and Makers Movement, aka Creative DIY. Finally, politics. As the manifesto says,
"The punk in Solarpunk is about rebellion, counterculture, post-capitalism, decolonialism, and enthusiasm."
Right, Solarpunk is anti-capitalist hands down. Sure, it doesn't seem to point in any particular direction, so it can accommodate both green anarcho-communism and degrowth, but with its mistrust of hierarchy and focus on decentralization, it doesn't take kindly to capitalist saviors or even green or sustainable growth. To quote, "Solarpunk without abolishing capitalism is just greenwashed cyberpunk. And that's something to look out for. Concrete and glass buildings with trees planted on them are not Solarpunk. These constructions have a huge environmental cost, and the trees are there just to cover it, like literally. In general, Solarpunk does have a problem with the idea of growth. Progress is fine, development is cool as well, but just growth, especially if it's economic, brings to mind the old saying that growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. Economy should serve the interests of the people and cooperate with the Earth system. Meanwhile, now it serves the interest of the richest by plundering the planet. What about technology? While in cyberpunk, high tech is contrasted with a low life standards, in Solarpunk it does the exact opposite. How? Well, in the first case, it's controlled by profits-driven megacorps, and hackers are just trying to yank some scraps from them. In the latter, it's controlled democratically, and hackers are simply folks who invent new uses for technology without fighting for profits or patents. Solarpunk, especially the real-world one, involves a lot of DIY spirit. The devices don't need to be glass and piano finish in order to look nice on the display shelf and be full of fingerprints and micro-scratches after like 5 seconds of using them. They just need to work, be user-friendly and upgradable. And, in the first place, not to have Plus, Premium, Pro, Ultimate or Enterprise plans. So, what's the difference between Solarpunk and the hippie movement? That's a hard question, because hippies have been completely assimilated, or recuperated, if you like fancy words, by capitalism and denigrated by conservative politicians. And Solarpunk is still a nascent movement, Definitely it's a counterculture that has access to the discoveries of science and philosophy which weren't available in the 60s. We now have better processes of creating communities which doesn't require cohabitation. We have a better understanding of both religion and phenomenon called post-secularism, the fall of belief that since the age of enlightenment humanity is heading towards ever greater secularization. This is why Solarpunk doesn't need to fall into cheap Orientalist mysticism while still understanding the human desire for meaning, which can't be satisfied by the mundane world, or, I don't know, a communist revolution. This makes Solarpunk able to appreciate and learn from indigenous peoples without making them into museum exhibits that we need to care for and mindlessly admire, though with a slight dose of first world superiority. It has learned from both successes and failures of the hippie movement. Alternative communities are cool and all, but they are also very fragile if they don't network. This is why the decentralized Solarpunk communities share information and support each other across various countries or even continents. In other words, Solarpunk means both technology and nature equally, using bottom-up power structures and respecting non-human interests, but without placing them above human ones, as deep ecology seems to do. Is this a utopia? Yes, and that's on purpose. Because, to us, Solarpunk is an antidote to the quagmire of political imaginary of the last few decades. Is it damaging something that works? No, because as degrowth researchers shows us, our present system does not work. In the name of economic growth, we exhaust natural resources, privatize what's left of our communities, and work more and more hours on worse and worse contracts. All of that in hope that with enough growth we'll finally get better nature, better public services, and better work conditions. So we keep digging down our hole because we are told this is the way to ultimately get back to the surface. And Solarpunk is simply here to remind us that we can look up, because even from this hole we can still see the sky. Or at least that's one way to think this through. Okay, so now that the main part of the video is over, for people interested in more, there's really not that much going on yet, but there's some stuff that's beyond the basics. All links in the description. First off, there's Andrewism's channel, if you somehow don't know him yet, focusing on Solarpunk and anarchism. Then there's Our Changing Climate, who also did some episodes on Solarpunk and embodies its spirit. There was also recently a web conference, SolarriseCon 2022, with 4 panels on empowering communities, Solarpunk aesthetics, existing technology, and barriers to better tomorrow. Do check them out. We're also planning a longer podcast-style video with some friends about our perspectives on Solarpunk, probably sometime in August. The quotes were provided by Chill Goblin, who is very chill. But probably not a goblin. Is he more goblin than chill, or he is more chill than goblin? Anyway, whenever you want to YouTube and chill, he is your goblin. Man. Person. Goblin person? Is that PC enough for you? Why do I care? Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who. Sorry, that got off the rails. Anyway, last but not least, I'd like to thank our patrons who support the expansion of our
Central Europe Media Empire. You can join us or
not, I suppose. But that's kinda lame. Anyway, the video is over, so leave a like, subscribe, share this video, and we'll see you again next time. Bye bye.